Hi dear friends, this is Bob Hatton, this is The Encourager, and I hope that today I can bring you an encouraging word. When we finished our studies on Friday, we were looking at Solomon and how the temple in Jerusalem was dedicated. Solomon had the Ark of the Covenant brought from Mount Zion, and it was brought into the temple. And the Ark of the Covenant was the actual presence of God, and God says he is the one who sits in between the cherubims, and the cherubims were two angels that were carved of it like little statues on top of the lid, on top of the lid that came on top of the Ark of the Covenant. And when they brought the Ark of the Covenant into the Holy of Holies, and these 120 Levites, they blew into the shofar horns in unison, all together, all at once. Yeah, the glory of the Lord came down, the presence of the Lord came in, the weight of his presence, the weight of his importance, the radiance of his very person filled that room, and it's like I suppose it's like a fog that came down. The people couldn't see anything, and the priests and the Levites, they were driven out of the holy place. We find that in 2 Chronicles chapter 5, and we had a look at that last week. Now it goes on, and in chapter 6 Solomon begins to pray. He gets down onto his knees in front of the whole people. He lifts his hands to the Lord, he lifts his hands to heaven, and he begins to pray. And in his prayer, he begins to describe a number of different scenarios that could possibly happen at any time. And he says, you know, if we have a famine and we've nothing to eat, and the people come to your house, the people come to the temple, and they start to pray to you, will you please answer from heaven? And then he goes on and he talks about if war comes and the people come to your house and they pray to you, will you answer from heaven? If this scenario happens, if this disaster comes, if that disaster comes, if people have problems in their personal life and they come to the temple and they come to the house of God and they call upon your name, will you not answer from heaven? So there's a number of scenarios that he mentions while he is praying, and then his prayer ends, and in chapter 7 it begins, and it said when Solomon finished praying, fire fell from heaven. And he was praying outside the holy place, not very far away from where the altar was. And there were so many animals that had been slaughtered or would have been slaughtered to be sacrificed on this day. It was a magnificent day of celebration as far as the sacrifice was concerned, and fire fell on the altar. It consumed the sacrifice. It burned. That was the very thing that happened at the end of the book of Exodus, when they dedicated the tabernacle to the Lord. The fire came from heaven. And the fire is, of course, it has to do with the presence of God. It's a symbol for the Holy Spirit. And when we just think about a few weeks ago, we celebrated Pentecost with the coming of the Holy Spirit, the birth of the church. And we read there in Acts chapter 2, verses 1 to 4, that when the day of Pentecost had fully come, the disciples, there were 120 of them, they were sitting together in one accord and in one place, and they heard the sound of a mighty violent wind, and this wind came into the room where they were sitting, and as they looked at one another, they saw that there were tongues of fire on the heads, the symbol of the Holy Spirit. And as they saw that, they were all filled with the Holy Spirit and began to speak in other languages as the Holy Spirit gave them utterance. They were filled with the Holy Spirit. This fire has got something to do with the Holy Spirit. Now, when we look in Romans chapter 12 and verse 1, Paul, he encourages us to bring our bodies as a holy, living sacrifice and to lay them on the altar of God. And then in that same chapter, he says, then don't be lazy, be diligent in whatever you do, and be fervent for God, fervent in the Spirit, be on fire in the Spirit. And there's a guy in the Acts of the Apostles called Apollos, and he is described as a man who was fervent in the Spirit. He was burning in the Spirit for God. And this is something that gives us our energy. This is something that moves us on to do all kinds of things for God. This is not a kind of fleshly zeal that we have, and where we, even though we're very tired, we keep on working. But this is something dynamic that comes from God. This is something supernatural, where God gives us supernatural zeal for him, being fervent in the Spirit. And today, on this day, I wish you and I pray for you that you will be burning in the Spirit, that you'll be on fire for God. And with this, I wish you a blessed day. God bless you. May he be with you, and have a good day. You're Bob Hatton, your encourager.